Do you want to hear the Rabbi Scheiner, Bern?
No.
Hi, Moira.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hello, everyone. We're ready to begin
Lost the Rabbi.
It's great to see everyone. We're ready to begin the new series of Torah study from the beginning, from Bereishit. We get the honor and the privilege of starting the Torah all over again. So if you have your Chumash, you just have to turn to the first page, which is Bereishit, as we begin the Torah all over again. Is everyone ready to begin? Okay. So I'm going to start by telling you an interesting fact. And that is that the first Torah portion of the entire Torah, which is Bereishit, spans the first 1,500 years of creation, which means that the first Torah portion spans more time than the entire remainder of the Torah. Let me repeat that again. The very first Torah portion of Bereishit, from 6 days of creation, and then Adam and Eve, all the way to Noah, is the first 1,500 years of creation. And when you go from Noah till the death of Moses, which is at the end of the 5th book of the Torah, it's slightly under 1,500 years, which means that the first Torah portion contains more time than the entire rest of the Torah, the entire balance of the Torah. So why am I telling you that? It's not only an interesting trivia fact to know that it spans such a long time frame, but it also tells us something else, and that is that the fact that something is physically lengthy is a reflection of the fact that it is spiritually lengthy, which means that the first Torah portion has in it great spiritual foundations that are almost equivalent, so to speak, to the entire remaining of the Torah. And the fact that it manifests itself in such a long time span of 1,500 years is because, as you could imagine, the creation of the world is the loftiest subject, because it's about God bringing the world into existence, the very creation, and the first human beings made in the image of God. And just to tell you what Jewish philosophy says about the creation of the world, that in Jewish philosophy, especially Hasidic philosophy, creation is referred to as yesh me'ayin, which means something from nothing. When human beings create something, they're always taking something and making something else out of it. So you take wood from a tree and you make a table out of it, for example. Every human creation is something from something. Something prior existed and you turned it into something else. You transformed it. You may have transformed it to something much greater. You may have perfected it. And that's what man's mission in this world is. As a matter of fact, the last word of the Friday night Kiddush that we say, which comes from this week's Torah portion, when it talks about the 6 days of the creation, Yom HaShishi, and then on the 6th day, God completed his work. The last words say, Ashabara Elokim, that God created, la'asot, to do. And our rabbis expound on this and say, God made everything for us to come and do, meaning that we have to take what he created and improve it. So, for example, there's a famous story. The Talmud says a certain Roman nobleman once asked the great sage Rabbi Akiva, whose handiwork is greater, man's or God's? And the Roman nobleman said, surely God's is greater. So if that's the case, how do you Jews circumcise your children on the 8th day? If God made the child perfect, the way God created the child with the foreskin, why do we go and remove the foreskin? Do we think we could improve on God's handiwork? If God made the child this way, that's the perfect creation from God. It's a little bit audacious for us to think that we can change or alter somehow God's creation. Who gives us the right to do that? And Rabbi Akiva responded to this man by saying, let me ask you a question. He showed him a stalk of wheat and a beautiful loaf of bread. And he said, what's better, the stalk of wheat or the loaf of bread? Obviously, the loaf of bread is greater and better than the stalk of wheat, because man's work is greater than God's work. God gives us the materials. He gives us the raw substances to take this world and elevate it. And perhaps in our generation, we've seen the greatest development as we get closer to the end of times, to the coming of Mashiach. There's been such a outbursting of knowledge, scientific knowledge, technological knowledge, so many discoveries in the last century or that are unprecedented. And we're really seeing how everything that God put into this world can be utilized for positive purposes. Like right now, we have a group of people studying Torah in different locations, and we could all see and hear each other through technology, something that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have in his day, or many generations of Jews up until recently didn't have this at their disposal. This is another example of taking what God gave us, the gifts that are latent in the world, and drawing out all of its abilities to the best ultimate goals. Ashabar Elokim, that God made the 6 days of creation and the day of rest, lasos, for man to build on it. But it's all something from something. Therefore, it says in Jewish philosophy that when a builder or a creator develop something, they could finish their creation and then abandon it. So I could build this table or this desk, and then I could go off. I don't have to return. The desk will exist. Why? Because there's really nothing new in existence. I just took wood and made a desk out of it. So the desk doesn't need my constant involvement. I could, after I completed it, I could leave it. Not so the creation of the world that we read in this week's Torah portion. Since God created this world, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, what brought the world into existence? It's God's force, God's energy, God's vitality that was imbued in the world to bring it into existence. And therefore, Hasidic and Jewish philosophy says, if God would stop permeating the world with his life force, even for 1 second, the whole world would go back to nothing. Because I'll give you a simple analogy. If I throw a ball in the air and the ball is flying, as long as my energy is in the ball keeps on traveling through the air. As soon as my energy ceases to empower the ball drops to the ground. It stops flying. Think of God's energy, which is what is propelling the world forward. And without that divine energy, it would cease to exist. And this is something one of the ways we see God's force in this world, one way is by the infinite creations and the perfection of the creations. When we talk about creation this week, one of my favorite stories is that this girl comes to her mother and says, Mom, where do we human beings come from? So the mom tells the kid the story, 6 days God made the heavens and the earth, and every day made something else. And on the 6th day, he made Adam and Eve, and they had children and children and children, generation after generation, till we came into existence. So the girl says to her mother, Mom, but I asked Daddy the same question, where we human beings came from. And Daddy gave me a different answer. He said that there was evolution. There was a big bang, and there was monkeys and apes and gorillas, and they evolved over many millions of years until we human beings emerged. So the mom said to the daughter, Daddy told you about his side of the family. I'm telling you about my side of the family, right? So you have people who believe in evolution. They look at this world and they say it happened with some big bang. Now, I'm no great scientist, but simple common sense says that when you see something so perfectly arranged, it's hard to say that it just happened by accident, by mistake, through a big bang. If I look at a building which has floors and plumbing and electricity and everything's running, the rooms are all organized in a normal way with hallways and doors and windows. I'm not going to say it just fell into place by mistake. There was a hurricane and blew wood and metal and wiring and plumbing into place, and it landed in the position to form a building. Well, if I'm not going to say a little building, 3,000 square feet happened by accident, how do you look at a universe with, billions of galaxies and stars and planets and sun and moon and rotations? And you don't even have to look at the universe, just look at the human body, how complex and structured and organized everything is in the body, how everything functions, how the brain works, the heart. I mean, it's not rational, really. It's not logical to say this happened by accident. Maimonides once had to prove to someone that God exists, and he did something very simple. He basically showed him, it's a whole story, but basically the punchline is he showed him an essay, like a couple of lines, a couple of paragraphs. And he told him that the way this essay came to be was that ink spilled on a piece of paper and by chance formed letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, and ideas. And this brilliant scientist said, am I crazy to believe that randomly ink could fall on paper and form hundreds and hundreds of letters and words and organize sentences? And Maimonides said, well, you would have to be a bigger fool to look at the human body, which has not hundreds of codes. The human genome, right, is you would need, I don't know how many libraries to fill it, to fill the human, just the genome of the body, so it's just not rational to think this happened by accident. You look at the world, you see there must be a an architect, there must be a designer, there must be a creator. But that's only one dimension. The other dimension is, as you see the world, we talked about the energy of God keeping the world going. So I gave you the analogy of throwing a ball. So if you're watching football these days, right, the quarterback throws the ball, it has a lot of energy. The further the ball goes, it slows till it falls. Anything that's physical declines with the passage of time, just like the human body, for example, right? So, because God originally made us to live forever, but then after the sin, we was destined to die. But physical things weaken and decline with the passage of time. It's like if you have a clock, sooner or later it starts to slow down. That's physical things. When you look at the world and you see the precision of all of the orbits of the universe, besides the fact that they don't collide, but the fact that the sun rises precisely when it's supposed to rise every day. And I could tell you what time the sunrise is going to be in 50 years or in 100 years from now. And it's not even going to be off by a minute because there's no weakening. Why? Because there's a supernatural force that's keeping it going. So God made us to build on what he created. He wants us to be his partners in creation. And one of the reasons why he does ask us, we talk about tikkun olam, perfecting the world physically, spiritually, in every way we have to contribute to the development of the world. Why did God do that? Why didn't he just make the world perfect? And again, why, if he's making a child, a perfect baby comes out of the womb with eyes and ears and heart and limbs and organs and kidneys and liver and teeth, a miracle in the gums, right? Couldn't God make the baby circumcised already? Why did he have to give us the mitzvah to go and circumcise the child? And the answer is that God is giving us the opportunity to be his partners because, if we were just passive in this world and we had no role to play, one of the greatest joys of life is the ability to create. Why? Because since we're in God's image, we want to be like God. God is the ultimate creator. And that's why we get tremendous joy. If you've ever built something or designed something or painted something or wrote an article or wrote a book or did any kind of work, the more creative the work was, you developed a business or whatever you did, right? The more creativity you have to put into that, the more pleasure and the more enjoyment you get. The more mindless the work is, the less pleasure and enjoyment you get. Why do we get pleasure when we use our creativity? You would think, okay, if I give you a job, you could either be a doctor or you could bag groceries at Publix. And I told you, I'll pay you the same amount of money. It's not like you're going to earn less. Most people say, I'd much rather be a doctor than bag groceries. And you say, why? A doctor has to think and work hard and come up with diagnostics and treatments and all of the hard work and study. A Publix bagger, he just has to put the groceries in the bag. It's a lot easier. And the answer is, we're not looking for easy. We're looking for enjoyment and satisfaction and fulfillment and pleasure. And the more effort, the more creativity, the more we put our mind to something, to develop, to create, the more we are in the image of God, who is the ultimate creator and designer of life, and the more satisfaction we gain from that. So God wanted to give us the pleasure of creativity, of being able to be builders, to be able to be creators in our own way, and get that satisfaction in godlike fashion of creating, of building. And I have to say that perhaps the greatest pleasure known to man is having children. And when you see your own child being born, and then you raise that child and you imbue that child with character and with personality and with values and principles, and you raise them to be a certain way, and you see your product, you see your hard work in your child reflected in their goodness and their kindness and their morality and their values and their lifestyle, you get the deepest pleasure, because that's the ultimate creation. You created a life. Why? Because God's the creator of life. And when you do something God-like, like creating life, and God actually gives us that ability to be partners with him. As a matter of fact, the first human child is born in this week's Torah portion. We all know what happens. God creates Adam, and then God says it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helpmate, a soulmate for him, which is Eve. And then Eve conceives and has our first child. And we all know the name of the first child, Cain, right? Cain and Abel, Cain. But in Hebrew, what is the word Cain? Kayan. And when she gives birth to this child, now try to imagine, we all know, women know it firsthand, men know it secondhand if they witness their wives giving birth. There's nothing more wondrous, more miraculous, more awesome than witnessing the birth of a child. It's just mind-boggling, right? Hannah, who we read about on the first day Rosh Hashanah, when she had her child, she praises God when she's blessed with Samuel, and she says, "Ain't sur kolokenu." There's no rock like our God. The Talmud says that. Why did she refer to God as a rock? It's a metaphor, but why this time refer to God as a rock? So the Talmud says, "Ain't sayar kalokenu." The word sur, rock, could also mean an artist. Sayar is an artist in Hebrew. There's no artist like God. Why? Because an artist could take a stone and sculpture a human physique of a body. But God sculptured a human body within a human body, and not only made a lifeless piece of stone, but a living child with organisms and life. So she said, there's no artist like God. So the greatest miracle that we could witness perhaps on earth is childbirth. But imagine, we know what childbirth is because we've been having babies from the time of creation. But imagine the first woman who never had this experience before. No human being ever had. And that's why she was ultimately named Chava. Her husband called her Chava in this week's Torah portion, because her husband Adam said, "You're the mother of all life. You initiated life on earth." So when she conceived and had her first child, she said, "I'm going to name this child Kayan." Why? Because she said, "Kaniti ish et Elokim," which means I created a life, a child, a human being with God. In other words, the awesome realization that she was a co-creator, that God used her womb as the laboratory to develop this creation of this child for 9 months. She said, I partnered with God. Kaniti ish elokim. I created a child with God. And that's not only true for the first woman to ever give birth, which was Chava, but every time a woman gives birth, they have that experience. So this amazing, miraculous ability to give birth is something that God endowed women with. And just by the way, that tells you a lot about God's opinion of men versus women. The fact that God chose women to be his partner in this holy task of creating life. Because if you talk about God powers, to create a life is a godly power. And God invested it in a woman, not in a man. You would have thought maybe God would have said, okay, I'll give both male and female the opportunity to do this so that they could rotate, make it easier for the woman. She doesn't have to have all the children herself. But God, for some reason, feels that a woman is more of a vessel and more aligned with God spiritually in his image, that she is more worthy or capable or suited to be his partner in bringing life into the world. And I mentioned earlier in my video today that I sent out that in Israel, there was a record. A man died by the name of Shlomo Suluman at the age of 117 yesterday in Israel. It's remarkable. He was born in 1903 in Yemen, immigrated in 1949 after the creation of the state with his wife and 4 children, went on to have 2 more children in Israel, his wife had 2 more children in Israel. He fought in the IDF. His wife sadly passed away a number of years ago at the age of 94, but he died yesterday at the age of 117. They think he not only the oldest man in Israel, but maybe the oldest man in the world. Now, I know yesterday John McCain's mother passed away at 108, but 117 is quite something. And what's most amazing is he obviously had 6 children, many grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. And his granddaughter said that up until before the pandemic, he was actually going to shul every day to daven at the age of 116. And she felt that the pandemic and the isolation unfortunately harmed him and caused his demise to come prematurely at 117. And it's interesting that this week's Torah portion is where God declares, after the sin of Adam and Eve eating from the tree of knowledge, that man's lifespan, you come from dust, you should go back to dust, and you shall not live forever. And man's lifespan shall be Vahayu Yamav Meyav Esrim Shana, 120 years. Hence the proverbial, may you live till 120 at Meyav Esrim Shana. And Moses, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu was the only human being in the Torah to live the full 120 years. Now, there were people who lived more than 120 years, but originally man lived much longer, but the age declined gradually until Moses lived till 120. So this man, Shlomo Suleiman, lived till 117 years old. Quite remarkable. So this is the crux of this week's Torah portion, the story of creation, the beginning, the Genesis. That's why it's called the book of Genesis, the Genesis of mankind. And but before we get to man's creation and the subject of man and woman, we start with the word Bereishit. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And one of the famous questions is that the Torah begins with the letter Bet, which is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the question is, of course, since Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, why is it that the Torah begins with the letter Bet? Wouldn't it have been more appropriate to start with the letter Aleph? As a matter of fact, the 10 Commandments that God gave the Jews after they left Egypt at Mount Sinai begins with the letter Aleph. Anochi Hashem Lakecha. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. The first letter is the letter Aleph. So why didn't God start the whole Torah with the letter Aleph as well? And one of the many answers given is that one of the themes of this week's Torah portion is the idea of Bet, the idea of two. Why? Because every day of creation, God does three things. And, we talked about creativity and being a creator and man's pleasure and task of creating things in this world. There's a 3-step process to creation, and we see it every day of creation. Step 1 is, and God said, let there be ... whether it's light or trees or sun and moon. And what this reflects, of course, is a vision, a mission statement. Every time you want to create something, it has to start with an idea. You have to have an idea of what you want to create in your mind. So God goes about planning what he wants to do. Let there be. There's the will. There has to be the will and the desire to create something. The second step in the process is Vayihi Chen, and it was, meaning a lot of people have the will to create things, but they don't have the discipline to actually create it, to actually implement it. So first you have to have the desire, you have to have the vision, you have to have the goal, you have to have the plan, but then you have to implement your plan. You have to carry it out. A lot of people have great ideas, but they don't know how to implement it. They don't know how to bring it to fruition. So God does not just the planning, but also the implementation. Now, in our society, you may have an architect who draws up the plans and then a builder actually implements it. But God does both, obviously. But there's something very interesting that we find, and that there's a third step to creation every day. After God creates what he creates each and every day, it says God observed what he created. Vayar Elokim. God saw, he surveyed his construction, whatever he built, whether the sun and the moon or the trees or whatever it was. And God says, Ki Tov, it is good. So here we learn a very important third step of creation that sometimes is overlooked. And that is that after you plan something and then you actually develop it and build it, you now have to declare that it's good. You have to continuously see the good in it and accentuate the good in it, for it to continue to develop and sustain itself. So the best example is a child. A couple says, let's have a child. Great. That's the plan. Then they go ahead and they create the child. But now starts the lifelong task of declaring, yes, Ki Tov, you are good. Seeing the good in the child, recognizing it, drawing it out, developing it. That's the main role of parents, through the love to bring out all the talents, the hidden latent abilities of the child by sort of holding up a mirror to the child and showing them their own potential of what they could achieve. So that's the third step of creation. But here's something quite fascinating. Every day of creation, basically, God says it's good. The only day he doesn't say it's good is Monday, because he made a division between the waters above and below. And our rabbis say God didn't want to bless division. But on the third day, which is today actually, God said twice, Ki Tov. And our rabbis, that's why we have a tradition that Tuesday is the best day of the week. If you're going to move or do something, you should do it on a Tuesday, because Tuesday is double Ki Tov, because God blessed it twice for Monday and for Tuesday. So every day basically gets a Ki Tov. It was good. There's only one day that God says that not only that God doesn't say Ki Tov, but God says the opposite. God says Lo Tov, not good, bad, mistake. And what was that? The sixth day of creation. When God made Adam, God declares, Lo Tov Hiyot Hadam Levado. It's not good that I made man alone. Loneliness is a terrible thing. No man should live alone or in isolation. You need companionship. You need friendship. You need love in your life. So therefore, God declares, I'm going to correct my mistake, so to speak, because it's not good. Lo Tov that I made man alone. Eselo, I will make for man Ezer, a helpmate, Kenegdo, alongside or opposite him. Meaning, God recognizes that it was a mistake or it wasn't good to make man singular. Man needs a partner. Man needs a soulmate, a friend, a companion. And God creates Eve to be that companion. And then God declares, Al Kain, Yazov, Adam, et aviv et imo. Therefore, man shall leave his father and mother, v'davak b'ishto, and he should cling, or davak in Hebrew, the word devik means glue, attach himself, become one with his wife. V'hayu lebasar echad, they should become one flesh, because Eve was created from the flesh, from the bone of Adam. So here, the Torah starts with the letter Bet, because the letter Bet, of course, represents two, to teach us that we need friendship, we need companionship. As the Talmud says, O chavruta, o metuta, which in Aramaic means either give me friendship or give me death, meaning to say that not having friendship, not having love is equivalent to not living, to death. So the letter Bet reminds us always to be with others, companionship and friendship and partnerships. As the verse says by King Solomon, Tovim hashnayim min ha'echad. Two are better than one, because if one falls, the other one can lift them up. And that's really the goal of life, to have friends who, when one person is down, one person is going through a hardship or struggle, there's someone else to lift them up. And this is the importance of friendship and community and family. And I think during this pandemic, we all realized that the most important thing we need as human beings, besides our physical health and sustenance, of course, is connections with others and friendships. And even if we were in isolation, thanks to technology and phone calls and all of that, we're able to stay in touch with each other. And that's what the human being, the soul, needs more than anything else. So it starts with the letter Bet. Another interesting thing that we see right away in the beginning of creation, every day of creation, is after each day it says, Vayi erev, vayi boker, and it was evening and it was morning, yom dat dat dat, yom echad, day one, day two. And of course, we know in Judaism, in the secular calendar, the day starts at 10 a.m., for example, right? There may be other civilizations where maybe it starts at sunrise. Judaism is very unique. And you tell me if you know of another calendar that works this way. I don't. And that is, we are the ones that say, no, the day starts at nightfall. And of course, that's why Shabbat and holidays always begin at nightfall, at sunset, at sundown. We light the candles, we usher in Shabbat and holidays. So our 24 hours goes from sundown to sundown. And the question is, why would the day start with night? Right? It's because the Torah declares, and it was evening and it was morning, day one, placing the evening before the morning. And the idea here is very fundamental, and that is that sometimes we have to go through the night before we get to the morning. In life, we shouldn't expect the sun to rise without the preceding night. Now, night doesn't have to mean darkness and hardships and bad things necessarily, but it does mean effort and toil and hard work and struggle. If you want to see the sun rise, if you want to experience the light of day, if you want to experience the bright times, there always has to be an investment of time and effort and energy to achieve that. In life, generally, the more precious something is, the more valuable something is, the more effort and investment of time and effort it takes. And therefore, the Torah is saying, first you have to go through the era. First you have to go through the difficult times or the challenging times or the times of toil and hard work. And then Vayhi Boker. And this same idea we also find in the 6 days of the week in Shabbat. You know, it's interesting in the Christian calendar, the first day of the week is Sunday. And the idea is that you start with a day off and then you go to work for the following days. In Judaism, it's 6 days you shall work, as God worked for 6 days, metaphorically, and on the 7th day you rest, meaning first you work for 6 days, and then you earn your day of rest. You don't start with the day of rest and then work. You know, someone once said, life is short, eat dessert first. And while it's cute, and yes, you shouldn't always be pushing things off for a rainy day because, you know, you got to enjoy the days of sunshine while you can and don't push things off on the one hand. Enjoy every day and every moment and seize the moment and the opportunity. But on the other hand, we have to realize that we get to our day of rest, we get to our day of pleasure, our day of enjoyment when we first invested 6 days of work first. And, you know, if you look at our society, you know, the idea of credit cards, for example, you know, I'll enjoy myself now, I'll spend now, I'll buy myself that thing I can't afford, I'll take that vacation I can't afford, and I'll worry about paying it off later. That's not the right philosophy. The right philosophy is first you work, you earn, and then you spend what you earned. Obviously, there are times you have to take loans in life for mortgages or things like that, but the general attitude has to be, first I work, first I, you know, achieve, and then I enjoy the day of Shabbat, or first I go through the evening, and only then do I reach the morning. Now, it's interesting that if the word, it says that the earth was, in the beginning when God created the world, the earth was astonishingly empty with darkness on the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters. And God said, let there be light. So it's interesting just to note that the word or, light, is the 25th word in the Torah. Now, why is that important? Because we all know that Hanukkah, the miracle of lights, occurred on the 25th day of the month of Kislev. But it's also interesting that the first thing God created was light. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said something very beautiful. He said, why is that that's the first creation? You would argue maybe that you don't need light. The whole purpose of light is to be able to see things. If nothing was created yet, why did God need light? I only need light to see things that exist. But if there's nothing that exists yet, why do I need the light? Also, God didn't make the sun and the moon till day 4. So what is this light that God made on day 1 if the sun and the moon weren't created till the 4th day? And the Rebbe says another way to look at this statement, let there be light, is that before you begin a project in life, we all know you have a mission statement. Every organization, every company writes a mission statement. And it's important to know what your mission statement is. Now, the mission statement could only be maybe one paragraph, but it's always to remember what your mission statement is so you know the why of what you're doing, It's been discussed in many talks and books by great entrepreneurs that the companies that are the most successful ones are the ones that not only have a what and a how, but a why. It's very important for companies to know, why are we creating this product? What is our mission? What is our purpose? Because if you don't know why you're doing it, even if you're very good at the what and the how, you won't be successful. Someone told me today that, you know, the Apple 12 is coming out today. They're releasing the newest iPhone. Could you imagine? 12, right? And, Steve Jobs was the type of person who had a vision. He had a why, what he wanted to do. He wanted to give people the ability to have information at the palm of their hand and be able to do everything they need to do from their phone. You have a vision, a purpose, a goal, a why you're doing it. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a retired physician who was very successful. He built, a number of, I'm not going to share his name, but he basically has a institute that's like in Florida. It's renowned because he has many offices and he's known for a certain line of medicine that he became renowned for. And just a nice Jewish guy, and I said to him, what was the secret of your success? And he didn't say because I was very ambitious or because I was, determined to make a lot of money. That's not what he said to me. He said, I had a philosophy to always listen to my patients and be kind to them. And I always, taught this to all of my, employees, my nurses, my doctors. When someone walks in, remember how you have to treat them and listen to them and make it the highlight of their day, even though it's coming to a doctor's office. He had a philosophy, he had a why, a determination of what he wants to do to help people. And that made him successful. So what is God's mission statement? God's setting out on this very ambitious project to create a universe, but why? Okay, not just how. The next 6 days, we're going to learn how God did it each and every day. But why did he do it? What was the motivation? And what is the mission statement that we all have to keep in mind as we go through life and further develop the world that God created and handed into our hands? And the Rebbe says it's 2 words: let there be light. In Hebrew, it's 2 words, yehi or, meaning the purpose of creation is to create light in our lives, to create light in other people's lives. As we go through our days, that's what we have to stay focused on. Why did I get up in the morning? What's my purpose of existence? What am I here to do? I'm here to bring more light into the world. Through my deeds, through my actions, through my behavior, I can bring light each and every day into the world and into the life of others. And that's why Yehi Or is more than just a physical light. It's a spiritual representation of what man's goal is. I want to focus on the 3rd day of creation and share with you what is such a beautiful midrash. First, I'm going to share with you something very powerful. Someone brought me a present yesterday, a new book, and I recommend it for everyone. I just started reading it last night. It's called The Gift, and it's written by the same author who wrote the book The Choice. Her name is Dr. Edith Eger, E-G-E-R. And if you don't know about her, she is a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor. She lives in California. Her story is remarkable. She told her story in the book, The Choice. I won't give you the whole story. I'll let you read The Choice if you haven't read it yet. Remarkable story of survival. But when she came to California after surviving the war and surviving the camps, she went to college, I think in her 40s, and became I don't know if she's a psychiatrist, but she's like a therapist, like a psychologist. She does psychotherapy. And she's had a practice now for, 40, 50 years, treating thousands of patients for all different types of things. And she basically uses her experiences from the Holocaust to treat her patients, because she said, what I learned in the Holocaust was more than I could have learned anywhere in my life, because I was experiencing the greatest tragedies, and her parents perished and everyone. And, I won't give you all the gory details, what she went through, but she really was close to death. And she said in order to survive, she had to find the wherewithal and the will and the tools within herself to overcome it. And she's used this in a way to understand life and human nature and how to overcome challenges. And she wrote this book called The Gift. It's not a very thick book. You could probably read it in a few days or less. And I just started it last night. And basically, she has 12 sections to this book. And basically, her premise is that as hard and as awful the prison of the Holocaust and the concentration camps and being in Auschwitz was, she was from Hungary. She said the prison of the human mind, the prison that we put ourselves in, could be more difficult even than the Holocaust. And she basically has 12 sections, and there's a picture of a key on the cover of the book, because she says basically these are 12 prisons that we all put ourselves in. When I say all, human beings, one way or another. And she wrote it in an order how to get out of each of these individual prisons. And the first prison, which is the first chapter I started reading last night after her introduction, where she reviews her story, is the prison of victimhood. And I'm not going to tell you what she writes, but basically she talks about how wallowing in self-pity and feeling I'm powerless, I'm a victim, I don't have choices, I can't change my situation, is a way of keeping yourself imprisoned in the state of mind of victimhood. And she said, my parents didn't have a choice about the way they died. And they came to Auschwitz, and the day they arrived, they were sent off to the gas chambers and they perished. But if you're alive, you have choices, and you are not a victim, and you have to learn to love yourself and not to let other people's attitude or actions towards you define or affect who you are. You have to love yourself, because at the end of the day, you're the only person who could be there for yourself, and you have to love yourself unconditionally. And she said, it's not being a narcissist if you love yourself. You have to hug yourself and embrace yourself and look in the mirror and say, I love you. And because you're the one who's going to be there for yourself. But talking about this idea of victimhood, and she says this is the first prison that you have to get out of, this mindset. The name of the book is The Gift. Very simple, Gift. It just came out on Amazon. I don't know if it's in bookstores yet, but it's a wonderful book. And she's 93 years old, if you could imagine writing this book at the age of 93 years old. And there's a picture of a lovely, beautiful Jewish woman. And I want to talk about the day 3 of creation, because there's a very powerful midrash. The midrash says that on day 3, God created, of course, the trees. And when God created the trees and midrashim are metaphors, they don't mean always literally. The trees complained to God, and they said, God, it's not fair. You created us trees, but at the same time, you created iron. You created the blade of the axe. And how are we meant to survive in this world as trees if the blade of the axe will come and chop us down? How can we survive against the blade of the axe? And the Midrash says that God responded to the trees and said, if you do not provide the wood for the handle of the axe, no axe can chop you down. And the answer of the Midrash is a very powerful psychological answer, which is this idea of victimhood. The idea is that nobody could chop you down. Now, obviously, people could do evil things to people in this world, and doesn't mean to be taken literally. But what it is meaning to say is that many times in life, we empower people. We allow people to chop us down. Sometimes you feel that somebody's chopping you down to size. They're criticizing you. They're demeaning you. They're insulting you. They're, defaming you. And again, it's not one size fit all that it's true across the board. But in many cases, we have the ability to allow those people to hurt us or not. And we don't have to remain victims. We don't have to give them that strength, so to speak, that power to wield against us. We could diffuse their power by taking away that handle to the axe, so they can't harm us, because they can't hurt us. And that, reading the book, and the fact that she chose to make the very first chapter in the sequence of the 12 gifts that we have to give ourselves, she says, the ability to not live as victims. This idea of the Midrash, which was said thousands of years ago, is obviously teaching this lesson in a very powerful way. You may wonder, why does the Torah tell us what God made on every day of creation? Like, is this a historical document? Torah is a book of teachings. And as we start the Torah today, from the beginning, we have to know what the first word is, Torah. What does the word Torah mean? Every Jew knows the word Torah, but what does it mean? Well, when you went to kindergarten or first grade, you had a Mora. A Mora means a teacher. Torah is the same as the word Morah. It means a book of teachings and instructions. The Torah is not a book of history. The Torah is not even a book of laws. It's more than all of that. It's a book of, it's like an instruction manual for life. You know, just like when you buy an appliance or a piece of equipment or even a little toy, it comes with instructions. Well, if God made this whole universe and made the human being, he wouldn't just drop us off without any instructions, without any guidance, without any, way of knowing what our purpose in this world is. So the Torah is the divine instruction manual that God gave us with our lives to know how to live our lives optimally. So when the Torah gives us the 6 days of creation, it's not just to know historically, factually how the world came about. There's actually the mitzvah of Shabbat, because God made the world in 6 days and rested on Shabbat, but God didn't have to give us all the details. There's lessons upon lessons upon lessons that we glean from every detail of creation, just like I explained to you about the wood and the axe. But here's a beautiful example from day number 4. When you look at day number 4, it says God made the sun and the moon. Now, originally, when God makes the sun and the moon, the verse says, and this is chapter 1, verse 16, God made the 2 great luminaries, the moon for the night and the sun for the day. But right after it says the 2 great luminaries, Shnei Hamorot Hagdolim, describing them both as great, then the very next verse says, the big one for the daytime, meaning the sun, and the small one for the nighttime. So there seems to be a contradiction. First, it says there were 2 great luminaries, but then it describes the daytime luminary as the big one and the nighttime as the small one. So the backstory that the Medrash provides for us is that originally God made the sun and the moon equal in their light. Now, it doesn't only mean in the size, because you know that the moon reflects the light of the sun. It doesn't have its own intrinsic light, but initially they had that both equal power of illumination. But then the moon came and complained to God. Again, in the Midrash, the moon talks to God and says to God, and this is the direct quote of the moon. The moon says, Ein shnei melachim mishtamshim beketer echad, which means 2 kings cannot share 1 crown. This was the moon's way of saying, you can't have 2 lights that are equal in size. You can't have 2 kings ruling 1 throne. Either, the sun is the king or I'm the king. You can't have both. You can't have 2 equally powerful rulers. You need the king, and then you could have someone beneath the king, a top officer. So God says to the moon, you're right. You make a very good point. 2 kings can't wear 1 crown, and you and the sun can't be equal size. Therefore, l'chi umati et atzmech, go make yourself a little bit smaller, diminish yourself. And that's what happened. Originally, they were the 2 greater luminaries, but then God says the bigger one by the day and the smaller one by night. And the rabbis say something beyond beautiful. They say that why did the sun merit to be the bigger one? Because not just because the moon complained, because if the moon brought out a good point, 2 kings can't wear 1 crown, and God agreed to the moon, why did he punish the moon for making a good observation? Why should he be faulted for making a good point to God? So the rabbis say it's not that the moon complained and was unhappy and was egotistical, let's say, and wanted to be larger, that it got smaller, which in itself is a lesson that when you try to make yourself bigger, you actually diminish yourself and make yourself smaller. Like a person who seeks honor and recognition, they usually make a fool out of themselves. They make themselves smaller. But a rabbi says something else that's even more powerful. The rabbis say that the sun remains silent when the moon complains. Here the moon was coming and saying, well, 2 kings can't wear the same crown, meaning I should be bigger, and the sun remains silent. And our rabbis say that those who hear others disparage them or try to hurt them or defame them or diminish them in some way, and they remain silent, they don't respond with anger or with ire towards them, they are like the sun in all of its bright glory and light. And, in Judaism, there's a concept of being mevater. Mevater means look the other way. Don't fight it. Again, there's no absolute rule. Sometimes you do have to take a stand for yourself and you do have to speak up. It's not across the board. But many times if someone says certain things, you can look the other way. You don't have to respond. As a matter of fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who just passed away, someone once asked her, what's the best advice you ever got? And she said, on the day of my marriage, my mother-in-law gave me the best advice. She said to me that in marriage, it helps sometimes to be a little bit deaf. And she said, I've used that advice not only in marriage, and it served me well in some 56 years of marriage, she said, but even in the Supreme Court, that if you respond to every insult or every accusation, it doesn't help your ability to persuade others. And being a little bit deaf is good in life in general, meaning you don't have to pick up on every comment that someone makes. You could look the other way and not respond in kind, so to speak, to someone else's taunts or insults or whatever it may be. And you may think, oh, I'm being a wimp. I'm being weak. I'm being, I'm being timid by not standing up for my rights and speaking up for myself and fighting back. And the Talmud says just the opposite. You are like the sun in all its might. The real secure person doesn't have to respond. The person who has to fight back and scream and yell and insult the person back, that's the insecure person. That's the weak person. That's the timid person. He may look like he's powerful and angry and strong, but he's actually showing his insecurity. The person who could remain silent and hear their disgrace being said and not feel they need to respond, they are like the sun in all of its power and all of its might and all of its light. And the Chafetz Chaim took it a step further in a very powerful way. The Chafetz Chaim said that when somebody is insulting you and you think about the words of the Talmud that you're like the sun in all of its might if you don't respond, he said, everyone has to go through a certain amount of suffering in this world. Some people sadly have to go through suffering with health matters. Some people go through suffering with finances, struggles financially. Some people sadly go through struggles with children, struggles in marriage. It could be a long list of troubles and struggles and hardships and suffering we go through. He says, if your suffering in this world is that somebody's insulting you, that somebody's shaming you, or somebody's taunting you, or saying things unkind to you, that's the least expensive way to have to, fulfill your quota of suffering in this world. And therefore you should rejoice. If this is the worst I have to suffer in this world, that I have to listen to somebody say something negative about me, let this be the worst. Let this make up for any other suffering that I should have to go through. It's a lot better than other forms of suffering. So again, the idea of the moon trying to bolster his position brought the moon to a diminished state. And the fact that the sun remains silent in the face of that is what made the sun so powerful. And we can be like the light of the sun when we remain silent with humility in the face of someone's derogatory words. So we didn't really get very far. We only got to day 4, and obviously there's 6 days of creation, and then there's Shabbat, and then the Adam and Eve, and the Garden of Eden, and the snake, and the sin of eating from the tree, and very, very, as I said, it spans 1,500 years. And then you have the first murder, fratricide of Cain murdering his brother Hevel out of jealousy, and the destructive nature of jealousy and civil rivalry, and all the way to the end of the Torah portion, which is the birth of Noah. So I'm sorry that in the 1 hour of time we didn't really get very far, but hopefully it will whet everyone's appetite to come to Shul on Shabbos and to continue to delve into this week's Torah portion, because as I said, it's not only physically lengthy, but spiritually very rich, which is reflected in the physical length of the Torah portion. And there's mountains upon mountains of commentary, especially on this first Torah portion. and we haven't even scratched the surface. We could literally, was probably spent a whole year doing a course just on this story. But may we continue to study not only this week, but every Shabbat. So next year on Simchas Torah, we could finish the whole Torah, and God willing, this year we won't have to be exiled from the synagogue for any weeks as we did this past year. We'll be able to read every single Torah portion in the synagogue, and next Simchas Torah we'll have another big celebration. So it's a very special thing that you're all part of the first Torah class of the year, the first Torah portion, and continue every week so we could study the entire Torah together. Wishing everyone a beautiful day, and I look forward to seeing you all soon, either in Shul or on Zoom. Take good care, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day.
You too, Rabbi.